and welcome to the After Party Talkback for Michael Waterman. I'm Rebecca Caines. I am the lead artist and co-facilitator of the Multiplay project, and we're really happy to have this last After Party Talkback with Michael Waterman today. I'm joined by Yujie, my host, and special guest Helen Pridmore, and we'll introduce ourselves properly in a moment while we're just letting everybody connect. So while we're waiting for that, just to remind you, I hope you've all been listening to Michael's radio show. He's had 4 episodes on CJTR Regina Community Radio as an artist in residence with the fantastic plein air artist in residence program. And if you don't know about plein air, it's super cool actually. It's a way to get artists involved in community radio, and the organizers ask what happens when radio is considered a creative space similar to a laboratory or a studio or a venue. Supporting expression and experimentation. So the Plein Air is an artist in residence program on 91.3 FM CJTR Regina Community Radio. And every month the program features a different local artist, a DJ, musician, band, or community member as a guest host who programs a month's worth of weekly radio shows. And you can find out more about it at CJTR.ca. And we've been talking quite a bit on this talkback about how great it is to have this kind of connection between the art scene and community radio. So let me introduce everybody again. This is our last go around introducing ourselves. So maybe start with you, Michael. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Michael Waterman. I'm a visual and sound artist, currently living in Ottawa. I make sound installations and I work experimentally with radio, both the content and the physical form of radio, and I do a lot of improvising.
And I'm joined with my co-host Yujie.
Hi, I'm Yujie. I'm a visual artist and mostly using technology to interactive installations and performance. And I'm also the project assistant of the whole Multiplay project.
And we're really happy to have another Multiplay artist joining us today as a special guest, Helen Pridmore.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here today. It's been fun listening to Michael's shows. Yes, I'm a singer. I'm a singer and a sound artist. I do a lot of experimental music and I do a lot of improvising. And I've been working the last few years in bringing improvisation activities to different groups in our community here in Saskatchewan. And I also work regularly, semi-regularly, with my partner W.L. Altman. We have an improv duo, which is voice and electronics.
So Michael, for people who are joining us the first time, tell us what we were listening to today. And particularly, I noticed some very cool samples. Maybe you can talk a little bit about them too.
I'll have to remember
what they were. Well, I might have noticed a few Canadian ones, for example.
Yeah, I remember now. What we heard was an edited version of my weekly radio show. It was last week's show, I guess, yes, that gets broadcast on CHMR in St. John's, Newfoundland, and simulcast on CFRU in Guelph, Ontario. And it's a 2-hour improvised radio show that I'll describe a bit more in a minute. But for the residency, I've been taking each week's show and editing it down to 1 hour. So it's an edited version of an improvised radio show that happens and has been happening for 22 years. The show, the Manlasher Carcano Radio Hour, links people from many different cities, mostly in North America. But for instance, today we were linking with Groningen in the Netherlands, as well as Los Angeles, Montreal, Ottawa are the common places. And it can be up to a dozen people improvising using we've been using Zoom since the coronavirus. Before that, we were mostly using Skype or Google Hangouts, but the radio show started before there was even internet, any of these platforms available to us. So we in the early days, we actually would just use the on-air phone in the radio station and a conference call. And we had devised, well, we had actually discovered some ways in which we could enhance the signal sent over the phone line that we were playing with also electronically. The idea is that anybody who wants to can join the jam. So we encourage people to join us, and it's very permissive, is the right word. It's kind of anarchistic. Anybody who joins us can, and they can contribute in any way they want. So that's what we were listening to. Then, of course, we got. I was asked some really interesting questions last week about what is my editing process, because of course the show when we're improvising is much more about the act of doing, but the editing of the show afterwards for broadcast is much more, it has much more to do with imagining what the listener is hearing. And so at that point, my kind of consciousness shifts, and so what we're just hearing, for instance, was because I have the luxury of editing it down by 50%, I can remove stuff that I think that it's no longer a live performance. It's an object that I can fine tune, and I kept in recognizable samples as much as possible in that what we were just listening to this time, including, yes, well, there was in the improvisation, I have like a filing cabinet full of source tapes, for instance, that I'm quite randomly selecting samples out periodically. And these source tapes have been, I've been making them ever since we started doing the radio show, and now use CDs and other means, but I still always have a cassette player going in every improvisation. And the tape that bubbled to the surface last week was one where I had been recording off of the radio in the kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was something that I would have it in the boombox ready to record anything that interested me as I was working in my studio. And this was, I think, CBC Radio commenting on a failed performance of the national anthem at a sporting event that what's his name? The popular Canadian musician, whatever. The guy. Oh, I'm terrible with the names of these people. Everybody, Adams, something. Is it
Bryan Adams?
Bryan Adams.
Bryan?
Yeah, Bryan Adams. And it's really poorly sung to my mind, but also he had not sung the current. The update to the words of the national anthem, hence the interest.
Great.
For CBC Radio.
I love it.
That was one sample that just kind of bubbled to the surface that was deliberately mixed into other things too. I don't know whether there were other samples that caught your attention that you can remind me of, and I can try to explain.
No, I was just thinking that some of it felt very connected to us being sort of isolated and worrying about the future. And I mean, probably that's my listening rather than what you chose, but there just seemed to be a kind of conversation about nationalism and Canada happening in there somewhere. Yeah. Just because of that you can't play the anthem without that happening, I think. Oh, yes. I love that it's
hugely recognizable instantly, no
yeah.
matter how it's sung.
Well, the first question I was going to get everyone to answer was just about technology and the relationship of technology in your practice. So maybe you can start us off with that one, Michael.
Well, I embrace all technology.
We've noticed, it's great.
And as much cutting edge as I can afford, to.
That's a good way to put it.
But so mostly trailing edge technology. I'm interested in also I'm interested in trying to make the technology do things that it wasn't intended to do. So we were Manlicher Carcano, the group, goes back, much further, go back to the mid 80s, and we were doing things with sampling before it was very popularly common, with vinyl, and we would do typical performances. We would have, a dozen turntables in the space, and we'd have things going on loop all the time, and we'd be changing, that, and also, banks of boom boxes playing either radio or cassettes, and we kind of saw ourselves as kind of technicians with this technology, unwieldy technology, and but it was really doing the performance. So
I love the phrase trailing edge technology. You've said that before. It's great. It seems like there's a bit of a recycled technology feeling too, right?
Well, the thing about, trailing edge technology that you can get at thrift stores or on recycling day in people's blue boxes, there's no kind of preciousness about it, so you can actually feel completely free to open it up, play around with electronics, do anything, and make it more personalized as an instrument, and so that's the freedom that it offers, that old technology offers, that we wouldn't really feel very comfortable opening up our computers and tweaking with electronics of that. It costs too much if it goes very wrong.
And Gao Yujie, you also work a lot with technology, and I remember your lab that you were working with in China with Zhengda was called the Low Tech Lab, right? So that was always interesting to me because it seemed like very high tech work, but obviously art is exploring technology in a different way.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like we've been always using quite a lot technology in our work and practice. And our lab, it was like the lab I was worked with in China was called Low Tech Art Lab. So it's kind of like a funny way to see how we using technology in our work, because we always say it's just the random things or like pretty normal things, technologies you can get like just in the street or something like that. But that's actually true, like when we started doing interactivity and installations in the beginning. And then very soon we found that kind of technology, the customized quality you can do is just requires more and more different like other interdisciplinary studies and working with more people from other interdisciplinaries. So yeah, so like to explore the intersection between technology, science, engineering, and art being always like my practice, and using a lot of softwares and hardwares. But I actually think technology in my own work as a collaborator. So it's like a collaborator who has its own personalities. Like it might not working when you need it works the most. So that's always the frustration when you are working with technology. But it also provides the a role of chance operator, which we talked last week, like the randomness of the algorithm itself lead me or the work to a place that probably I wouldn't imagine before. So I always think technology as a collaborator in my work. But ultimately, I think technology, at least just in my own practice, I think it's just a way for people to have a better or a meaningful conversation or interaction between us, or to explore a better understanding of oneself. Yeah.
I love that idea of thinking of it as a collaborator. And Helen, you've been using technology for many years in all sorts of ways, but you always start with, I'm just a singer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel That's really how I feel. I feel like I dabble in technology, and I have used it in various formats. But my background is music. I studied classical music as a young person, and so my practice sort of stems from that. But then opened up when I started to explore technology. And actually, Michael talking about trailing edge technology reminded me of a few early things. There was this great piece that I performed a few times. It's by a New York artist called Phil Klein. I don't know if you remember it, Michael. It's called Unsilent Night. And it's a very old piece where you had to get a whole bunch of boom boxes, and they all had to run on batteries, because Phil Klein would send you all these separate CDs with different electronic sounds on. And the idea was you walked through the town at Christmas time with all these boom boxes on your shoulders, everybody playing a different track. And it was just crazy, beautiful, ancient technology, but we had a lot of fun with that.
Excellent.
We performed that a few times. Yeah. Do you remember that, Michael?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
But that sounds lovely. I'd like to find out. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah,
Michael,
I bet.
Especially. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, Michael, didn't you do a piece? I remember a Christmas piece that you did.
I did. I made a mashup of over 200 samples of Silent Night.
That's right.
So
well,
this really interests me a lot.
Yeah.
I knew there was a connection. I thought that sounded like almost the same piece, but not quite.
Right. No, but I also love the idea, well, for one thing, of public interventions of sound, but also multiple boom boxes, and like, especially if they've all been composed to somehow align, but they're moving through a space, so they're spatial, and so there's a random chance element, but in general they're coming together. It sounds like a really interesting piece. I'd love to.
There may well be an updated digital version. I think maybe we'll look into that, because maybe Multiplay can have a holiday online show. We can do your piece, and we can do Unsilent Night as well
for sure
in December.
I love it that we're doing it. That's already a plan. That's happening.
We'll see if we can track them down. We used to have the tracks, I don't know. We'll see if we can find them.
And are they each track is? Are they kind of edited or versions of Christmas carols already, or are they?
It's just electronic sounds.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Do they conjure up Christmas music in any way, or not?
Not really. No, it's just electronic, and again, I think it was written in the late 80s, so sort of early experiments with technological electronica. And yes, they intersect or they don't intersect. Again, the element of chance is part of it. But for example, a lovely memory I have is of one Christmas season. My husband and I were both residents at the Banff Centre for the Arts. So we organized a performance of this, and we walked into Banff with our giant boom boxes on our shoulders. And it was magical. The sound echoed off the mountains, and it was wonderful. So, those are kind of, again, early experiments with technology. I have done quite a bit of work with my partner, WL, using my voice filtered through software like, for example, Ableton Live, and creating improvisations that way. But actually, most recently, and it's kind of funny to talk about it on this show, the last couple of years, I've been sort of backtracking and going back to just using my voice, and telling people I use the technology of my body. So because there are so many things, so many possibilities just with our bodies. But it's been so far an interesting adventure.
The second thing that came up in questions online and in conversation was ideas of failure. And I thought that's really relevant to working with technology in general, but also improvising. What do you think, Michael?
Well, Manlisher doesn't believe there's any failure, because there's no perfection either. It just is. The failure is if you're trying to achieve something and you can't. But everything we achieve is perfect. Or at least it is. Certainly that. As I was kind of hinting, that notion changes when I'm editing, the work after the fact. But for the performance, it's more about the performance, really, the setting the conditions for the performance, and then allowing it to unfold as it will, like allowing it to have its own life, so in fact the less we intrude on the event as far as determining determining the outcome in advance, the better. So it just, the idea of failure doesn't, I mean, there's technology that fails as far as not functioning the way it was supposed to, but as we mentioned, but that isn't necessarily a failure, it just is. It's a component that you work with, and that is the thing. And there's and I think I mentioned last week that I do kind of make or modify a lot of instruments. I'm really interested in the elements in these instruments of not necessarily being able to control what happens, like letting, if the thing is, like, I'm more interested in a cassette player that has a dying battery or motor in it, because it will add new sounds that weren't intended, like by the way it was originally made, so certainly failure when we're improvising is a real, the notions of success and failure is a really inhibiting kind of notion to work towards. It's more responding in the moment to whatever is happening.
I like that idea of instability better.
Yeah.
That you were saying, this sort of deliberate keeping yourself on the edge of control. Yeah, Helen and Yujie, what do you think? Is failure part of what you explore?
Well, I was just going to add, again, from my background as a classically trained musician, there's a huge weight of failure when you study music that way. You must recreate that piece perfectly or you're a failure, and so if you do a recital and you don't get everything exactly note perfect, it's a failure. And I think that's one of the reasons I got interested in experimenting beyond that, because why would that be a failure? Perhaps it's interesting to add something different to a piece by Mozart. I mean, not anything against what Mozart did, but there might be some other ways of experiencing that music or listening to those sounds. And so, I mean, I think I agree with Michael. It's pretty hard to define what a failure would be, because I think it can be really, unfortunately, limiting to describe something as a failure.
Yeah, we've got some cool feedback coming on the live chat, actually. People discussing these ideas. So Stacey Bliss, for example, saying that everything we achieve is perfect, or is it ? And W. Altman was saying that he was quoting from John Cage, saying that all sounds are by their nature harmonious. So these are kind of lovely questions about perfection and harmony that I think resonate in all of the practice that we're talking about. So another question that came up was around ideas of the future. And I guess that comes up often with technology too, that somehow we are jumping into the future, or we're slowing down time, or we're using time differently. What do you think, Michael? Is that something that you think about?
I don't really think about it in my art practice too much. I'm aware of that both my kids are artists in art school, or finishing up art school, and aspire, to the same kind of the pursuits that I do. And I know that their world is very different than mine, and so their understanding of, I'm aware of somewhat of a disconnect between, my ideas and theirs, and that's about as far as so I kind of get a glimpse as to how some of the current and kind of future ideas of where the art school or the next generation is going to take stuff like this. But I think that it will be that I don't really think of it in my work, and I don't really think I'm not trying to. I mean, I think that just as the technology, the improvisation is more about being kind of outside of time in a way, just kind of, you know, almost achieving this meditative state where you just are. I think that in a kind of a larger context of the future and the past, you know, also. So I don't really have anything else to say.
No, I think I've always thought that improvising does put us back in time somehow. Like, in, you know, things that dislocate us out of a sense of time. When we improvise, we feel more grounded back into time in some ways, even though it might feel different and slow down. And I don't know, what do you think, Yujie? Is the future part of what you're thinking about?
For my own practice, I like for the working process, that's not be part of, like, there always a question I would ask myself, that if you are like going 20 years after, and then looking back what you are doing, would you still think it will be valuable, or would you think it still kind of solve some problems you are facing now? So if that's kind of a question always there, like, but for like when you start doing things, I always think like the present, that's the thing you need to working on. You need to spend the time, like every second, every minutes well to keep moving forward, things like that. So there's always like there's a like a sentence in a movie I saw, like in a Japanese movie, animation movie, I saw that they are saying basically future is a place that when you are not think about, and then it will come. So like when you ignore, or if you are keep thinking about it, you will like miss right now, then you will miss your future. So that's kind of how my strategy of like working present or working on the time right now. Yeah.
So if you're just joining us, we're really happy that you've come along for our last talk back with Michael Waterman and special guests today, Helen Pridmore and my co-host Gal Yujie. This is a talk back following Michael's residency at CJTR Community Radio in Regina, and it's been a really fun thing getting to chat about Michael's work and radio art and collage and experimentation and improvisation. So we really enjoyed it. Thanks, Michael. I've loved it. But lots of people were interested also in your sound art practice. So not just your radio work, but maybe some of your installation and instrument making. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, where to start?
I know, it's a little tiny, you know, whole career, you know, a few sentences. Maybe just a couple of projects.
Well, I can kind of say that, you know, I up until about 2000, I kind of separated my sound art practices from my visual art practices, and I was visually, as a visual artist, it was a solitary practice in the studio, where I was mostly making paintings and collages, and they kind of were evolved slowly into kind of installations of found materials and things. But my sound art was pretty much entirely based in collaborative improvisation. And so I kind of separated the isolated studio practice from the social kind of sound. I kind of even think of sound as more of a social kind of entity than visuality, you know. But then around 2002, I did a master's degree in fine arts, and at that time I consciously started thinking about bringing these two different aspects of my practice together, and I started making sound installations specifically. It kind of at that same time, I also became more interested and even more competent at electronics, you know, like making circuits and things. And I started building kind of electromechanical installations that would generate sound in the galleries. I mean, it evolved from these kind of collection installations, these installations that I had been doing full of found materials into kind of found materials that actually functioned and made, and both were kinetic and sonic, you know. I guess an early installation I did was called RoboChorus, which was kind of, you know, robomorphic kind of, you know, objects that were in a gallery that were dormant until somebody enters the space, and they had motion sensors that would trigger the lights and sound on each one, and on them there would be there was each one had a deconstructed cassette or a CD player that played a drone. The first one played a certain pitch, a drone made of many sampled sounds, mostly from my radio show, and then the subsequent 7 were the first 8 notes of the harmonic series, so that if they were all triggered together, they would make this kind of dense harmonic tone cluster. But people could move around and trigger individual robots at the same time. I was kind of interested in Aeolian harps and how these instruments play the harmonics, or the wind is what plays. It's a kind of autonomous sound installation you put out in the wind, the pressure of the wind will vary the harmonics that you're hearing from all these notes that are tuned to a single note. And so I made a kind of a gallery version of it, where the gallery goer is the wind and their movement in the gallery is the pressure that is fluctuating this harmonic kind of cluster. But then you could also go up to anyone individually and start recognizing all kinds of recognizable sound samples, things like, they were dense, like samples from people's answering machines, you know, I can't even begin. I should actually write down a list of some of the samples that were in that one. So that was an early one. I made, I don't know how many of these installations you want me to describe, but I made an installation from that. I just kind of liked the objects of the electronic components on these robots and the spinning discs. So I made an installation that was really that component greatly enlarged to be in the gallery. So it consisted of a 6-foot plexiglass disc in the middle of the gallery that was slowly rotating. Underneath it, there were a row of photo sensors, and above it, there was a light that shone down onto the sensors. And then on this disc, there were bits of black electrical tape. And whenever as it's rotating, whenever any one of those interfered with the sensor underneath it, it would trigger one of the many different mechanical contraptions that I had in the gallery that were playing, that were generating sound in some way, you know. And they were made from, you know, I was taking apart baby monitors to create feedback in different parts of the gallery, and I had wind motors that blew wind into recorder mouthpieces that would, and then I had taken apart vacuum cleaner motors and all kinds of things that were triggered by this central disc in the middle. So it was really like it was a enlarged and simplified kind of CD player itself.
Super cool. Yeah, I saw RoboChorus, and I usually show that to my sound art students, and they often love the personification of the little robots. Like there's some sort of sense that there's a presence with you in the gallery, which kind of links back to your idea, Yujie, of the collaborators, of the technology as collaborators. Yes. Is this the same exhibition that you told me a robot from next door came in and started interacting?
It is.
Tell everyone that story. That was super cool.
I showed that piece quite a bit, but I was showing it at Gallery Lambton in Sarnia, and it was a group show of artists working with, you know, with robotics in some way. And my gallery space had my RoboChorus, but in a gallery next door there was Reva Stone, a Winnipeg artist, had made a robot that would kind of move around freely within the space that this gallery space would capture video footage of randomly of people as they entered into the space, and periodically would stop and project it onto the wall. And so, and it had an accumulative memory that lasted more than this show. And so it was randomly collecting information and regurgitating it. But it moved around freely in the space, and it was life-sized. Or human size, that is. And the way they contained it within the space was they had a small wire that I think, or electrical circuit that went across that would prevent it from exiting the gallery. But one morning when the gallery staff came into the gallery, this robot had exited her space and had entered into my space and was triggering all my robots, so that she was dancing around, and they were having a big party, basically.
I love that so much. I think that is brilliant.
So they completely had a life of their own. We didn't need to be there at all.
That is so good. Well, also instrument making, you were talking about last week and showing off lots of cool instruments, but you've been making instruments with ice. Is that a recent
most
work?
recently, yes, I did I was made a lithophone, a mechanical lithophone, last year or a couple of years ago, which was really just a prototype for something I want to do a more complex version. But it was really it was like a player piano something like a player piano with a big drum that was playing mallets that played on these stone pitched stones that I had. And I was interested in natural materials, the sonic properties, especially the pitch properties of natural materials. And I actually, for this piece that you're referencing, I collaborated with another Ottawa artist, Jesse Stewart. He had been working with the ice lithophones also, and so I built it was a two-part exhibition at New Adventures in Sound Art in South River here in Ontario. The one part was an outdoor geodesic dome, and it was presented in the winter, so that the ice would stay. And we made a whole series of ice bars that were some of them which had embedded contact mics, and the people could come into this geodesic dome and play this instrument. Beautiful pitches that these ice bars have. But at the same time that they're in there playing these instruments, they're also hearing broadcast from the second part of the installation that is inside the building. And in there was a series of a dozen or so IV bags with frozen water. So there's ice, and as the ice melted in these IV bags, they would drip down onto various stainless steel mixing bowls that had contact mics in them too. And so those sounds were going into the geodesic dome outside, and also the sounds that were being created in the geodesic dome were coming into. There was an 8-channel sound system inside the gallery that was playing both the sounds of the dripping of the IV bag, frozen IV bags, and also the sounds that people were playing on the ice sculpture outside. So it was a kind of interactive, both between the audience and the instrument, but also between the two instruments. They were interacting with one another also sonically.
That's beautiful. And those tuned stones that you had, we were playing with some of those even up in Quebec, I remember. So we actually hid some of those tuned stones as a geocache as part of the Multiplay project. And so far, I think 65 people have found them and commented. So it's like a little interactive improvisation box that we have hidden up in Per Se in Quebec that's full of those tuned stones and a little score for playing them. And people have been commenting about finding them. So that's been really fun. I actually have one of the instruments I made at one of your workshops. with me today. So this is one of the ones we made at Quebec. So it's made out of a beautiful old honey tin that we had. And then stones and shells and feathers. And then inside is all these things I collected. Yeah, I collected on the beach. So we definitely want to do a bit of improvising. So I thought that might be an excellent segue to us having a bit of a play. Sure. But before I do, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Multiplay, just for folks who are listening that don't know very much about it. So Multiplay is a national Canadian project exploring improvisation and digital strategies, and every artist involved is doing public engagement of different kinds. Helen, did you want to talk a little bit about what you were up to?
Sure. Yeah, it's been fun working on Multiplay so far. Unfortunately, of course, a few things that we had planned for right now have been cancelled, but we're hoping that we can resurrect some of them in the months to come. But an ongoing project that I've been working on is working with young people in a program here in Regina called, well, the full title is the Big Sky Center for Learning and Being Astonished. But generally they just call themselves Astonished. And it's an organization for young people with complex physical disabilities. So they're in wheelchairs, they have obviously limited mobility. Some of them have limited ability to speak and to communicate. And this program, Astonished, provides opportunities for various things, classes, going out on trips together, and having a bit of a social interaction time regularly. So for the past, gosh, it's probably been more than a year now, I've been meeting with folks from Astonished, the young people, and doing some jams. We've been doing some improvising together. And we've been using some technology. One of the things that we've had a lot of fun with is a looper, you know, an electronic looper. They're very easy to use now. And so people can record little snippets of themselves, and then we can layer them and play around with them. So we've done a few fun soundscapes. We did a soundscape like going to a Rough Riders football game, I remember. And the last session we had, we were actually starting to explore poetry. I had brought in a couple of poems, and we were exploring sounds or playing with the words themselves to make a bit of a soundscape. And then, of course, we got shut down, and we haven't explored jamming together online yet. I have met with them a couple of times online, but I'm hoping that we can continue some work. And I'm actually interested, Rebecca doesn't know this yet, but I'm also pondering the idea of trying to expand this into care homes, long-term care homes, and explore doing some fun, crazy improvising with people there, and see if that might be, yeah,
sounds awesome.
Just a creative outlet for them. So.
I love that idea. And one of the things Helen and I and John and Yujie have been having lots of fun with is exploring the 360-degree camera. We streamed one of Helen's concerts, and we'll be working on more in the future. We've actually just started collaborating with Jamulus and online improvising, so we'll see what comes out of that. So there's lots of cool Helen-inspired Multiplay adventures in the next year that we're super excited about. And Michael, who was meant to be here with us in Regina doing part of his public engagement for his part of Multiplay, but he's talked about that in the last 2 episodes. I don't want to make him tell us again, but stay tuned for next spring when he will be coming back to Regina, installing at the Dunlop Gallery. Thank you to Wendy Peart at the Dunlop, as part of a Multiplay exhibit that includes work by John Campbell, and will include artist talks by all of the Multiplay artists, who include Holofun Audio Collective in Regina, Jim Harley in Guelph, John Campbell, myself, Michelle Stewart, Helen, and I think I've missed somebody. And lots of great partners and connected projects. So we have projects.
And Yujie.
And Yujie, how could I forget? She's right there. And we have projects happening up in the Yukon, across Canada. We have festival appearances, gallery talks, and all of this will be happening. We just had to slow it down a little bit due to our isolation. But actually, I really want to take this chance to thank the Canada Council for the Arts for sponsoring this amazing kind of exploration of what digital strategies can do for artists. And I've said this both weeks, but I'm going to say it again. I think the timing is exceptional, that they have really just preempted that we need to get more familiar with digital strategies and ways of sharing our work just in time for us to really need it. So they've really been very supportive of the Multiplay project. So check out the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategies Fund. You can find out more about all the projects that they're funding across Canada. And I also want to thank Amber Goodwin, who we had made this connection with Regina Community Radio, with Michael's work. And it was supposed to segue with the exhibition at the Dunlop, but of course we couldn't do that. But Amber still had Michael join the Plein Air residency for the month of April. So thank you so much, Amber. And then we hope next year to make another connection with the CJTR Community Radio when he's back in town. So check out CJTR FM in Regina or online if you're not in Saskatchewan. So it's been really fun. Let me say that before we start improvising in case we get too excited. I want to thank Yujie so much for doing this with me, and thanks to Michael for talking about all things experimental and improvisatory, and Helen for joining us today. So let's do a bit of improvising, hey? I can show you what my instrument does. I don't know what you've got happening at your end, Michael. Your studio is way fun. I kind of want to go play there.
I'm going to just change my technology a bit. I'm going to plug in I don't know, did you hear that? Sorry.
If you did, can you hear my? No.
Oh yeah, but you're a bit soft.
Oh, soft? Okay, well, I can fix that.
I'm going to open up my instrument just because I want to show off all the fun things I've got inside. I inbuilt a tool into the instrument for opening it. See, you taught me well, Michael. So this was a honey tin, and we collected found objects on the beach as part of one of Michael's workshops. And inside, I think you can see, are shells and random beach detritus that we found on our walks. Strange metal discs that were parts of ships, I'm sure. At least I tell myself they are. Yes, so it doesn't have a name yet, but it's more of a kind of percussive instrument, I think. What are you going to play with, Yujie? Oh, is she still there? I think we lost you for a second. How about you, Helen? Are you singing?
I'm probably going to use some kind of body technology.
Sounds great.
And I have a book of poems. I might use some words from the poetry.
Oh,
and
awesome.
Yujie's got some glasses, I think.
Show us again, Yujie. Ah, very nice.
Oh, good,
Nice.
Good.
I just want to add, Yujie and I did some work together this semester, and she did some wonderful improv-based exercises simply using glasses and water and pouring water. And she made some beautiful, we called them exercises, but they were lovely sound pieces. So
Beautiful. I look forward to hearing them.
I'll wait, watch, look, look. Look, look. Look. I'll wait. Watch. Look. Look. Look, 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 I'll wait. Watch. Look. Look. That was fun.
That was very fun. Thank you so much. What were you playing, Michael?
Well, I started with the brapaphone that I showed people last week. Just a really a friend called it a brapaphone. It's a kind of a trumpet made from PVC pipe, and I was processing that through a multi-effects processor that I have here, and then I ended up playing this, which is a little. Basically, I made a little op-amp circuit there that is has a microphone that I got out of some thrift store home electronic thing, and a speaker that I got from somewhere else. And then it has this really nice little switch. I don't know if you can see that is an old-fashioned switch, and it turns it on just by making contact there. So I can play it by turning. So I can actually, if I have, especially as the end, I was having delay happening, that I could just have short little samples by turning it on, by touching it and turning it off.
Fantastic. Somebody suggested it looked a little bit like a musical bong.
Exactly. Yeah. It looks like I'm up to nefarious.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great fun. Thanks, Yujie. Thanks, Michael. And thanks, Helen, for joining us today. Check out multiplay.ca and come and see all the Multiplay events that will be happening here and across Canada and online. And Michael, we look forward to having you in Regina.
Look forward to being there.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.